Hello and good evening. I think it's evening, right? It's afternoon here, night where you are. So this is Cami Evans, and we're going to turn the tables a little bit on Kim Alexander. And I want to introduce her, but first I'm going to introduce AJ's Fight, which is what we're here to kind of shed light on and share during Eosinophil Awareness Week. And so first, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each AJ's Fight. AJ's Fight funds medical research, community education, and offers support to people with eosinophilic esophagitis, or E.O.E., which you'll hear a lot today, which requires severe food restrictions. And I want to get more into that later on in our conversation. But first, I think we should start with your story. So, Kim, what's your story? How did we find each other? How did you find this world of eosinophilic esophagitis?
Well, there's a lot of years in between that, right? So
yeah, well, that's true.
AJ was born on July 12th, 2006.
Okay.
And from the time that he was 2 days old, he had difficulty eating.
Mm-hmm.
He's the last of 4 children. And
I was going to say, it wasn't your first, so you probably knew.
Right, he wasn't my first. And you know, he came home from the hospital. It was a regular birth. And he was 4 days old the first time I took him to the emergency room.
Oh my God.
And just said, like, you know, in Kim fashion, like, I'm going to give this one back. There's something going on. I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah. What do I do?
He, you know, we had difficulty with latching on. We had difficulty with him eating. We just had a lot of different issues related to food and him holding stuff down, a lot of mucus, a lot of vomiting.
Wow.
And it just, you know, progressed from there.
Yeah.
Fast forward to meeting you. I think AJ was probably 8 or 9 years old when I realized I wasn't the only person going through this. Yeah. And I know that it sounds really strange, but I wasn't heavy on Facebook and I wasn't really into social media. I had no idea what the foundations were. I didn't know about APFED. I didn't know about Cured. I didn't know about the consortiums. I didn't know about specialty hospitals. I didn't know about any of these things.
Right.
And then got to the point where I was like, well, he can't be the only kid, right? Like, it's a rare disease, but it's not that rare.
Right.
And one day I just did a search and I found all of these groups and these people. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person who's dealing with this. Before then, I never talked about AJ. You know,
really?
If I took him someplace, I said, he has these issues. I feed him. Nobody else does. And that was kind of how I managed things.
He didn't go very many. Like up until then, how was it going? How was his care? Did you feel good about his care? Were you finding answers, or was it just the same for that amount of time?
So AJ was diagnosed when he was 1.
Okay.
He was 6 weeks old when we moved to Pennsylvania.
Okay.
He saw a local pediatrician in Reading, a small, they call it a city. I call it a town coming from New York City.
Yeah.
But it was a small community. No one knew what E.O.E. was. Mm-hmm. He was on acid reducer. He was seeing a pediatrician really often. Mm-hmm. And I was being called a bad parent, you know, same kind of story that a lot of people have, right? Yeah. There's something wrong with what I was doing. There was something wrong with how I was feeding him. And, you know, I wasn't sitting him up long enough. And, you know, the whole thing, you feed him and then you look at him and you hold them in front of you upright at a 90-degree angle so that food doesn't come back up. And all of
you're
those
ready
things.
If it does. Like,
right. You know, he was considered failure to thrive. He wasn't gaining weight. He was not thin, but he was not growing.
Right.
And so the pediatrician finally said, let me give you a referral to a gastroenterologist in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So Hershey, being one of the larger hospitals, is Penn State Medical Center.
Okay.
We went there. AJ went through a battery of testing. He was tested for cystic fibrosis. He was tested for other motility issues. He had a barium swallow. He had a barium enema. And we finally found this one gastroenterologist who said, let me scope him. And I didn't know what a scope was. And I was like,
Right.
you
What
want to
is
do
that?
what?
Yeah.
And he explained to me what a scope was and what he had to do. And he said,
Which
I
is,
know,
which is, I mean,
well, it's taking the camera, going down his throat, doing some biopsies, taking some pictures, and looking around to see what was going on in there.
okay.
And he said, just let me do it. I know it sounds crazy, but let me do it.
Mhm.
There's this new thing. And
Oh.
so I did. And he said, this is what your son has. So I had a diagnosis. He told me, don't give him milk anymore, don't breastfeed, take him off of these foods, and here's some Pediasure.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
Pediasure has milk in it, right?
I was gonna say, I saw my head turn, right?
So, so
Huh.
then we are
Yeah.
in this situation where I don't know what E.O.E is.
Yeah.
I'm not a nurse yet. I
Okay.
have no idea what I'm dealing with. I have this diagnosis. I don't live near anyone else who's experiencing this.
Right. That you know of.
And
Right.
this GI doctor is going with what he thinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's one at the time. And we kind of went with that. We started doing the slurry, the swallowed steroid, budesonide and Splenda. And kind of went from there. Some things
And
worked.
he was on the acid reducers too. So, and all those tests, like insurance, where were you at with that at the time? Because I know that's a big concern for people because you take all these tests. It's a big conversation in our community about how often do you scope? How much does that cost you? And it varies from insurance to insurance and place to place. So, how did that come into play at that point? Because you've got 4 kids. It's not like you're,
Right.
yeah, it's got to be a.
So at the time that this was happening, AJ was on commercial insurance through my employer, and most of the costs were covered.
Okay.
And at that point, very honestly, I was at the mindset of if it wasn't covered, so what?
Yeah.
I just started racking up hospital bills, basically.
Yeah.
Formula, because we were doing Pediasure at the time and not one of the more expensive medical foods.
Okay.
Those were not very hard for me to get. And then there were lots of samples that the clinics and stuff would give us.
Oh, good. Okay.
To date, AJ has had 44 scopes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he'll be 15 in July, and he's had 44 scopes.
Yeah.
So at the time, insurance wasn't a huge deal because the bills were not impeding anything for me.
Okay.
We went to a hospital that even though I had an outstanding bill, he was still able to get services. And I know that's not the story for everybody. There's many people who are in situations. I even know of people who have gotten divorced so that they would be eligible for Medicaid, though they were still together.
I've heard of that, and that's just crazy. We've got to do something different in this country if that's what it's coming to. But for you, it worked out, which is good. Up to this point, but it is, again, super varied across the spectrum, and the number of scopes ranges too, depending on what's going on. 44 is a lot. We don't count in our family. I don't know why. I just decided I didn't want to count that. So, but it's very different, right? Person to person. But
it is different. And AJ was diagnosed almost 15 years ago.
Yeah,
and
true.
So
true.
15 years ago, that's what you did, right?
Yeah,
you spoke every quarter. And now we know so much more, and we know what symptoms look like, and we know how bodies react more when they're symptomatic. And so he no longer scopes as often as he did when he was younger. But as a toddler going into school age, if you were trialing something, you did that for 3 months and then you scoped again.
Oh yeah, right. At the next school holiday, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But so you talk a little bit about the slurry and all the formulas and stuff. So has he always been on a medical food?
Yes.
Okay. So always is like a supplement.
Yes.
To some other foods. And I know at some point he got a feeding tube.
Right.
So where did that come in? And then when you get into that, I remember when we had the slurry, I had like a crate, and you had kind of like this equipment area, kind of like now I have a crate with masks, right? And then it was like, so your little medical corner, and I would imagine that you had more than just a little medical corner,
Mm.
because there's a lot of other things that come into it, like a lot of the equipment or a lot of, so tell me about that, because I'm not as familiar with that part of it.
Okay. So AJ was actually 9. Um, Prior to that, I would bargain. Like I bargained a lot with GI doctors, with gastroenterologists.
Nice.
And I had a healthy level of anxiety about having him with a feeding tube. And most of that was centered around what having a feeding tube meant for him and his ability to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a cooker.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, you are.
one of the things that allows me to show love to my family and to those people who I care about is food.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I had to mourn the idea that I had a child that I couldn't feed.
Yeah.
And I think that played a big role in me not wanting the feeding tube.
Yeah, I believe that. That makes sense.
It was
It's
it
like
was a
your love
personal
language.
failure. It was
Yeah.
a personal failure.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah.
I could not, especially after going to nursing school.
Yeah.
Um, I found myself in a place where I felt like I was a pediatric nurse, and
Mhm.
I felt like I was instrumental in helping other people's children, but I could not help myself. I
Yeah.
couldn't help my son.
Mhm.
And I could eat typically. For the most part, could eat whatever it was that I wanted to eat.
Mhm.
And here was this kid of mine who couldn't.
Mhm.
And I had to manage a household where there were 3 other people,
Yeah.
other children,
Yeah.
who also ate typically.
Mhm.
And then there's him. And
Mhm.
how do you balance that?
Well, I think we talked about before too. We, like everyone else was here last time, not necessarily, but the mental health part of it is a big part of it. And it sounds like, from not being able to feed him, not being able to solve the issue, like I'd love to hear the story about nursing sometime, because I would imagine some of him being sick drove you into
Absolutely.
that profession. And so that was because you were ready to find the answers. And then you find yourself doing all of that and then not being able to. So I can
Right.
imagine, like you said, it's like a mourning. And I think there are lots of steps through this disease that is mourning, right? And
Absolutely. Every
and
time there's a failed scope.
yeah, yeah.
So, but back to your question, he was 9. At 9 years old, AJ was 47 pounds.
Okay.
So he was very, very thin.
Yeah.
And at that point, considered moderately malnutrition.
Okay.
His bone density was off, it was below average.
Mm-hmm.
He was extremely short for his age.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I found myself in a situation where I really needed to make some decisions because he was never going to grow
Right.
if he didn't have the proper nutrition.
Yeah. Supplemental somehow. Yeah. Help.
Right. And, none of the formulas tasted good enough for him to drink enough of them
Yeah.
to really get what it was that he needed.
And he was older too. So
Mhm.
sometimes when people start when they're real young, it's different because they're used to that flavor, but he was older when he got more into that. So I can see why that would be an issue.
There was a time that I could get him to drink some of them. There
Uh-huh.
was a time where he would eat the alternative cheeses. There were a lot, the alternative breads.
Mhm.
And then as he got older, he just got to the point where he was like, I don't want any of that.
Mhm.
He also started experiencing the older symptoms, right? So he started
Right.
having dysmotility and
Mhm.
difficulty with the swallowing and things getting stuck. And he
Mhm.
started self-restricting.
Yeah.
So he was 7 days shy of his 10th birthday on July 5th, I guess 6 years ago now, when
Mhm.
he got his feeding tube put in.
Mhm. Mm.
Um, and we went completely elemental. He ate
Okay.
nothing by mouth at that point. His numbers were so high, and we could not figure out what he was reacting to because it seemingly felt like he reacted to everything.
Mhm.
And so we took everything away, and including the steroids, because he had been on steroids for 10 years.
Okay.
We took everything away and we started with a clean slate.
And let his body just kind of
Relax.
rest. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And how did it feel? Um, like, was pressure off? Was it, some people I know say it's a relief and I wish I would have done it sooner. And I would imagine not everybody says that. I don't know. But was that, so how did he feel about it, you know?
He understood
Uh-huh.
why he needed the feeding tube. And I think that he was more okay going in than he was afterwards.
Okay.
I think I don't know what he really imagined,
Yeah.
but logically, medical
Yeah.
maturity, right?
Sure. Sure.
Logically, even at his age, he understood why he needed the feeding tube.
Yeah.
And he even understood, in my opinion, the process.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that nothing would go in his mouth, I don't know that he completely understood that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think that was one of the most difficult things,
Yeah.
that I won't eat or drink anything other than water
Mhm.
by mouth for a period of time. And we did that for a long time.
Yeah. When did he start getting freebies? I know because I've seen some amazing birthday like cakes that you've created, and you really did a great job kind of balancing that or kind of making it as fun as you could. And so what are those kinds of things? Because I know there's, you know, freebies, but I don't know what that is and when does that start?
So we really didn't do anything, not even sugars. We did nothing
Okay.
for probably about 6 months.
Okay.
And then the first thing that he did was peaches.
Okay.
So we did peaches, and he still does peaches.
Okay.
Um, we did broccoli, and then we did string beans. Both were no's.
Okay.
We tried rice, and that was a no.
Mhm.
So we went probably an entire year where peaches was the only safe food that he had.
Yeah.
Um, and in this time, he's tired. He's tired now.
Yeah.
He's tired of the no's.
Yeah.
He's tired of this is not working. He was a 24-hour feed, 23 hours
Wow.
for a long time
Yeah.
because we couldn't find any safe foods for him. Um, and because he had gastroparesis.
Mhm.
So gastroparesis is a delayed emptying of the stomach.
Mhm.
And so what it meant for him was he felt full for so long that we couldn't feed him quickly. We couldn't do what we call a bolus feed, where he got
Okay.
a lot of formula at one time. He got a little bit of formula over a long
Long
period of
period.
time.
And you probably do they lose the idea of even what hungry is? Do they get those sensations? I don't even,
I don't
I'm,
know that he got the sensation of hunger because he was a continuous feed.
yeah,
What I think he got was the desire, what we call pleasure feeds.
yeah,
Many of AJ's feedings up until probably maybe a year and a half ago, we called pleasure feeds because none of it was enough nutrition to sustain life.
okay,
But what it was and keep him eating, avoid oral aversions. It
yeah,
was the idea, even plaque buildup. I don't know that I ever. You say an apple a day keeps the doctor away,
oh
right?
yeah, yeah,
We say that as children, we're taught it. It's
yeah,
it's like it's innate in us to say those things. But the validity to that is that if you don't use your teeth, you start getting this buildup.
I had
You
no
know,
idea. Yeah, I didn't even think about that part of it too. Yeah,
yeah, dental appointments were traumatic for him when he was younger
yeah,
because he would have such large amounts of acid buildup
oh,
on his teeth, and like plaque buildup really
interesting.
on his teeth, that the dentist would fuss at us, not understanding what EOE
Right,
was, not
right.
understanding why that was. That was traumatic for him. It was a struggle because he was always chastised
Yeah,
and he couldn't do anything about it. He
right,
did not
exactly.
chew enough.
Out of both of your control,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Yep. So,
Okay,
so
I asked about equipment and then I never let you get to it. But what about all the equipment that went with all of that? Because there is, I mean, there's a lot, isn't there? It's considerable. I know, I remember you not having a pool and you being creative with that. So tell me about some of the, I don't even know the medical equipment. What's the, I know there's an abbreviation for it, but
So durable medical equipment.
Okay, durable. Okay,
DME equipment. So for the feeding tube, you get an extension, which is this plastic tube that goes from the low profile feeding tube or a button, a Mickey. He has a Mickey button, but they come in a mini one. There's a couple of different kinds you can have.
Okay.
For children, typically they have a low profile button that if they don't have an extension attached to it, you don't really see it.
Okay.
And there's an extension that comes to it, and there's a feeding bag. So the feed goes into the bag. And AJ always wanted to hang it on a pole.
Okay.
For whatever reason,
Hey,
it not being on a pole,
right?
it was kind of anxiety building for him. But it also meant that I had to travel with this pole. We travel a lot. Or pre-pandemic, pre-apocalypse, we traveled a lot. And so I was always lugging this feeding pole around. And I'm like, okay. So hotels were especially interesting. So each month you get 30 bags, you get 4 extensions that you have to wash. You get, formula, however much formula you need for the month.
Which is a lot, isn't it? I mean, it's not like you just get a can for a few weeks. You get how many cans, like, do you go through in like a day or in a week?
So we use a can a day.
Okay. So
that's for us at that point with his feed, we were using a can a day.
Okay.
He got 2,100 milliliters of fluid a day.
Okay.
And that's 2,100 calories. This is a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
And so that was his daily calorie allotment. And the amount of calories a kid needs or a person needs, because there are adults who have feeding tubes and get formula as well. It's just calculated based on how big you are, whether you're still growing or not, what you require.
What you do in a day, probably, like what your level is. Okay.
Yes. So they come in boxes, they drop them off at your front door. The hardest part is dealing with the DME companies, prior authorizations for formula. There are a lot of insurance companies that don't cover formula. Okay. At one point, we were with a DME company that was charging $33,000 a month for formula. Okay. And Blue Cross Blue Shield, who was my insurer at the time, told me I could buy the formula because it was groceries and it was my responsibility to feed my son.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so it took me probably about a month and me writing an email to the president of the hospital that I worked for to say, it would be a shame if I came to work every day to take care of sick kids and I had to start a GoFundMe to feed my kid. Yeah. And he fixed it. Oh, good. I was impressed. He fixed it.
Crazy. That's like $1,000 a can. I mean, essentially.
It was ridiculousness. And it doesn't cost that much retail.
No. Yeah. But
for whatever reason, that was the bill that I was getting.
Yeah.
I remember posting it. It was just like, look at
I do. Yeah. I mean, well, you see different stories about, and it's also so varied. Again, like some people, it's just crazy how different of an experience family to family it can be, and how stressful that has to be. Are you kidding? I don't even know where you begin to deal with that. So that's a lot. But so you've got that many cans, you have one pole, you have tubes, and so if he's doing it continuously, I mean, the backpacks, is that where the backpacks come in?
Yes.
Generally.
So if you have a kiddo who's feeding and mobile and moving around, then they carry the feeding bag and the pump and all of that stuff in a backpack with the extension hooked up to their G button or whatever,
whatever kind of tube they have.
Whatever kind of tube they have. So then it's hooked up there and they carry it around. AJ hated carrying it around.
Yeah.
Carrying the backpack meant that he had to have a rolly book bag. It meant that he couldn't carry a book bag and his feeding backpack.
Yeah.
And so he didn't like doing that.
Yeah.
But because of the gastroparesis, we didn't have a lot of options when he wasn't eating anything else. because we couldn't give him a lot of formula at one time.
Right. And this is
Uh,
a dumb question, but like you go after school, how much liquid is in that bag? Like, does it
it
last
would
all
be a full
day?
bag.
It's a
Yeah.
full, so it's a full backpack. So it's not like a cool fanny pack size.
No. It's a
Fanny
full-size
pack.
backpack.
Okay, so yeah,
Um,
so you really don't have a lot of choices. It needs to be our
no.
next $1 million. I mean, we've got to figure out cooler ways to handle these things, right? Come on,
Right.
all these great minds, let's think about it. But so yeah, and so he has his backpack, and then you have, but he's been off slurry, you say. So
He
that's
has been off of, except for twice, over the last 6 years, he has not done the slurry.
okay.
I was of the mind frame that if I was going to go as far as putting in a feeding tube and removing all foods, then why were we doing steroids too?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah. Especially
And
if it
so,
wasn't growing, because sometimes they say that can, depending on who you talk to, right? It can get in the way of growth sometimes. So,
and AJ has growth hormone deficiency. They'll never say it's because of the slurry, but he did spend 10 years on it, and
yeah,
he now does growth hormone replacement. So he
okay.
does a shot in his stomach every day, because he doesn't produce growth hormone.
Okay.
Um, and so he was diagnosed with that last August
Okay.
and started the replacement then.
So right around like 13, 14, right after he turned 14, something like that. Yeah. And how's that been going? I mean, is he getting any wins? Tell me he's getting some wins here.
He's taller. He's about my height now. I'm 5'2".
Okay.
So
Good.
he is right around 5'1 3/4", I believe the last measurement was.
I'm sure he'll tell you exactly.
Yeah. I think that we have a lot of wins.
Good.
I think that the wins are, we are still pushing forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's on one of the biologics. He's on dupilumab,
Okay.
Dupixent,
Uh-huh.
and we do that every 2 weeks.
So what does that mean? Tell me what that means if I don't know that much about it. So what does biologic mean? It's just a different kind of medical treatment? Is that
Yeah, it's just a different kind of medical treatment. He
is it
gets,
a shot? Isn't it a shot?
it's a shot.
Okay.
We do it every 2 weeks.
Okay.
They deliver it to me here at the house, and it
So it's
what
good
it
you're a
does.
nurse because you would have become a nurse anyway, right? I mean, it's like you halfway become a nurse and all this care you're giving.
Right,
Huh?
absolutely. Absolutely. So what the Dupixent is doing is it's reducing the amount of eosinophils in
Okay.
his body systemically.
Okay. So stops it
And
kind
there's
of over.
there's it Dupixent is previously used to treat severe allergies,
Okay.
atopic dermatitis, those kinds of things, and it is now in clinical trials for eosinophilic esophagitis.
So is he in a trial then? He's in a
He's
study?
not.
Okay. He's just getting it and like for another diagnosis, probably.
Compassionate use.
Okay, perfect.
So AJ is one of those kids that they consider untreatable.
Yeah.
And so he is now receiving Dupixent as for compassionate use. And he does have asthma, so that helped.
Yeah.
In terms of that, getting it approved. He also does have a topical dermatitis. So
Yeah. Okay.
all of those things helped in
Helped.
getting the medication approved for him.
Mhm.
And it seems to be doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Good.
He has less inflammation. His eosinophils have been controlled. He
Okay.
was scoped in March, and his highest count was 3 per high-powered field.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so he is eating, I want to say maybe 14 or 15 foods now.
Oh my gosh. How is he
Um,
handling that? Because that's a big adjustment. And are you making him or is he making him? Because I know
We
he's
both
like,
cook.
good.
AJ loves to cook.
But I want to make sure you're able to kind of feed that in your own soul, right?
Yeah.
You're able to give him and provide for him in that way too.
Yeah, he lets me cook for him every now and then. It depends on what it is, but he does truly enjoy cooking for himself. He has 15 approved foods. He doesn't eat them all.
Okay.
You know, these kiddos, when they get approved for something, they eat it ad nauseum, right?
Yes,
and
totally.
stop eating it.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't eat all of them. Right now, we are trialing dairy and wheat
Oh, yeah,
which are like huge.
huge.
Um, and so he seems to be doing okay.
Good. I'll knock
Um,
on some wood.
and so that's kind of where we are. So I took him to get his first milkshake, and he was
Oh
like
my gosh,
really
yeah,
ecstatic. So
yeah.
that's been it's been okay. I
I would
think
guess
that
though that like it's almost hard, I know, to get excited because you're so worried about the other shoe dropping
right,
almost. I mean, I think we've talked before about how it's just halfway mental, it's just the disappointments and the losses, right? And you
yep.
get something, but then it might be taken away. So then how much do you really want to let yourself enjoy it? And
Mhm.
so hopefully he's able to just enjoy it. And I mean, hopefully it sticks around, right? But that
Yes.
all adds to the hard stuff in there.
I think it's all of those things that you mentioned, and it's also what does he do?
Yeah.
So I think at a certain point he got to the point where he started hiding symptoms because he was so afraid of stuff being taken away from him.
Mhm.
And the thing I think about is this is all experimental. We don't know what Dupixent does long term, right?
Right.
We
Right.
don't know what uh, mepolizumab does long term. We don't know what any of these medications, even the slurries, you
I
know.
still can't say those words. You say them so easily. Dupixent I can pull off, but the OMABs, I have no idea.
Lots of practice.
Yeah.
Um,
In nursing school. Let's just say that. You're a nurse. I don't have to know how to say it, right?
so we don't know what those things look like long
Yeah.
term,
Right.
but we also know as of right now, he has to do it every 2 weeks for the duration.
Yeah.
So it's a shot every 2 weeks,
Mhm.
as long as I want him to be okay eating those foods.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of where we go into why I started the foundation,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Well, you said you just didn't know that much and you finally found all those organizations, but before that you didn't even know they existed. You tell me.
it's I always say we need a better way to treat EOE.
Mhm.
And I think that we've learned a lot more. And I think that we have better ways to treat EOE.
Mhm.
But when AJ leaves my house and goes to college and then is now responsible for giving himself this injection every 2 weeks, or
Yeah.
being responsible for not eating things that are triggers,
Mhm.
or being in a situation where he doesn't know that there's a trigger in something he's eating,
Mhm.
or just a little normalcy, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
having to be worried about what's in it,
Mhm.
or not having to ask, can I see the label in the cafeteria? Or not having to have a 504 and be in college, right?
Right.
Like just being a typical college student
Mhm.
or a typical adult. Let's say he decides he doesn't want to go to college, but he just is living on his own or goes to a trade school. Just having some normalcy in his life
Mhm.
and not having to be responsible for taking all of these medications.
Mhm.
AJ takes medication because his esophagus doesn't work well in terms of bringing food down.
Yeah, that's a
It
great way to
is
put it too. Yeah.
it's partially paralyzed. He takes medication because his stomach is as well. He takes medication because his intestinal tract doesn't work properly. He takes medication because he doesn't produce growth hormone. He takes medication not to react to foods.
Mhm.
And he takes medication so he's less depressed. He takes medication every day, all day, over and over again to reduce the acid in his stomach. He takes medications to deal with the side effects of the medications that he takes.
Right. Right.
And so when is it enough? The kid doesn't know anything different.
Yeah.
He told me maybe a month ago, I don't care anymore. He said he rather not eat anything at all than have to keep taking all of this medication.
Mhm.
I watch him gag on pills.
Mhm.
He has never been a time from the time that he was 2 months old that he was not on medication.
Yeah.
And there's never been a time that I could go to a restaurant and not ask to see the manager
Right.
or buy something from a supermarket and not have to stand in the aisle and read the label.
Mhm.
And I wanted answers.
Yeah.
And I didn't know another way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know another way to get answers but by creating a seat at the table for myself.
Mhm.
And so we moved to Texas in 2014. And we started going to one of the largest hospitals in the United States.
Wow.
It is it's the third leading hospital in the US.
Wow. That's
We
huge. Yeah.
have international patients that come to Texas Children's Hospital.
Mhm.
There's foundations and there's research and there are all of these things. And we were being seen in the E.O.E clinic, the EGID clinic, but they weren't.
EGIT. Say what that is.
Eosinophilic gastrointestinal disease clinic. Um, and they weren't involved in very much research.
Yeah.
So we had these great doctors. He was being treated by great doctors. They attended all of the conferences. They were really invested in what was happening with this disorder and this cluster of disorders.
Yeah.
But we weren't tapped into anything.
Mhm.
And it was really, really status quo. And I came here and I started roaring. And they, till this day, they're like, we didn't know what to do with you. You know, like, I'm like, but there has to be more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about that time that I'm starting to see things online and join groups and talk to people
Mhm.
and talk to other parents and learn. And then I'm here and I can't afford to fly my kid to CHOP or to Denver or to Cincinnati.
Mhm.
I don't,
You're
I
the
don't,
big, there's some of the bigger treating hospitals.
right. And
A lot of people
bigger
travel.
treating hospitals, but also the hospitals who are involved in research.
Yes. Yeah.
These are the
Specifically.
hospitals
Yeah.
that are involved in research and are doing things to try to figure out how to cure, how to better treat,
Mhm.
to develop some of the standards that we have now, right? Scoping standards and medication standards and diagnostic standards. Because up until what, maybe 3 years ago, there was not even criteria that
Yeah.
was uniform to diagnosing EOE.
Mhm.
What came first, whether it was the acid reducer or a scope, or how
Right.
long were you on the acid reducer before you scoped to get a diagnosis.
Mhm.
Um, the acid reducer was treated as a rule out. It was treated as, if the child responds to the acid reducer, then perhaps this is reflux and
Right.
not necessarily EOE. And now we found that there are some acid reducers that actually treat the EOE.
Yes.
And so it's all of these things that we're talking about, and these are conversations that are being had, and they're going to these conferences, they're having these conversations, but they're not bringing back the research.
Right. They're not a part of any of the stuff that you can help. You want to affect that change and you want to help your child
Right.
see some of the changes.
And the only way I knew how to do that was to push.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was it. That I didn't know another way.
Mhm.
The only way I knew how to do that was to be the squeaky wheel.
Mhm.
And I support any foundation that does
Right.
research in EOE. I don't
Yeah.
care which one it is.
Right.
If they're doing legitimate research in EOE, I support it.
That's
I
right.
think that we all have one mission: fix
That's
this.
right.
Um, but they weren't housed here.
Yeah. Yeah.
They weren't doing anything here. I couldn't participate in anything in Houston, Texas.
Mhm.
And so that is what AJ's fight was born out of. It was born out of frustration. It was born out of, I have this child that I'm looking at every day wither away.
Mhm.
And we have the population here that needs to be treated. We have
Right.
the population here that something needs to be done about.
Mhm.
And so I was a fish out of water. I had no idea what I was doing. I
Yeah.
had no idea that I would talk to this many people. I
Mhm.
had no idea that I would be sitting right now, right here in front of this camera, even having this conversation with you.
Right.
I'm an introvert. Nobody believes that anymore, but I am.
I believe it a little bit. I believe it a
I
little
am an
bit.
introvert,
Yeah, yeah.
thrown into
But
this.
there's nothing that a mom won't do. I mean, like you want to affect some change. So it's been 6 years. Tell me, what kinds of things do you do? What does AJ's Fight do?
So we've had an annual walk each year.
Okay,
We've moved to virtual for the last 2 years because of the pandemic.
but
But
still
each
do it.
May,
Figured it out.
yep,
Yeah.
each May we do a walk to commemorate Eosinophil Awareness Week.
Okay.
We donate that money to Texas Children's Hospital to advance research. We have funded the family days that Texas Children's Hospital has done um, in order to bring awareness as well as share new information.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm most proud of is that AJ's Fight has truly been instrumental in Texas Children's Hospital joining Seeger.
Oh, that's awesome. That is.
So,
So tell them what Seeger is, because
oh,
you know,
I'm gonna have to Google that. It's
I
the
know it's like it's
consortium
the consortium,
on.
eosinophilic GI, basically all the doctors and people who come together to set up all the parameters, right? All those things that you were talking
Yes.
about, like
So it's
what.
the consortium on eosinophilic gastrointestinal disorders research. I
There
believe
you
that's
go.
what it is.
Perfect.
I'm
That sounds
probably
good to
gonna
me.
be wrong, but I think that's what it is.
Pretty close.
Um, so but the amazing thing about Seeger is this. They collect data.
Mhm.
So AJ doesn't need to be scoped every 3 months.
Yeah.
If we can go to Seeger and say, show us a kid who presents like this and
Mhm.
what you found.
Mhm.
We can go to a single entity and get information.
Mhm.
And so it changes how we have to deal with the individual
Yeah.
when we have the cluster to look at.
Mhm.
They also are like the control for research.
Mhm.
And if you're a part of the consortium, then research can come to you.
Yeah.
And so we now have research.
That's amazing.
You
Good
know,
job.
that
Good job,
AJ
Mama.
can participate in and all of the kids can participate in. So
Yeah.
we're not one of those foundations that I can say we've raised $3 million because we haven't. We're not one of those foundations that I could even say we raised $250,000 because we
Mhm.
haven't.
Right.
We are a foundation that remembers the person.
Mhm.
We are a foundation that truly believes in building community
Mhm.
and not having E.O.E be the definition of your child.
Mhm.
We believe that our children deserve to be our children first, and the research needs to happen, but we must remember that there's a person behind it all.
Mhm.
And we are a foundation that will push. We will
Yeah.
push for the answers. We will push the people who are making the decisions, who are doing the thinking. We will look at things from different directions and continuously just look for different answers.
Uh-huh.
In the
Make
last
it
2 years,
a little easier for the next guy, hopefully, right?
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely, to get there, right? To
Yeah.
get to where we are a lot sooner than we got there.
Right, right, right.
And so, we want to continue to affect change, but we also want to bridge the gap between the typical and the atypical. We
Mhm.
want to bridge the gap for children who go to school and have to bring that backpack,
Yeah.
or the medications and deal with the nurses.
Mhm.
We've done talks in classrooms to
Mhm.
explain what it is and why it's important not to tease children who eat differently.
Yeah. Give them
Why
some
it's important
understanding. Yeah.
not to have food be the center of a lesson in a classroom.
Mhm.
How we can be more inclusive for children, not just with the E.O.E, but just with allergies,
Yeah.
so that we are remembering the whole situation,
Mhm.
and make it less traumatic for them. because
Yeah.
it is traumatic for a lot of these kids.
Mhm.
Going to school every day, it's anxiety building when you have an extreme, whether that is an allergy that you will have your throat closing, or an
Right,
allergy that's going to make you violently ill in the middle of school.
right, right. The stress that goes along with that is incredible for some
Absolutely.
of these kiddos, for sure.
Absolutely.
So tell me, we've had some talks, and you and I could clearly go on forever, and I'm here for it. But tell me, who else are you going to talk to? Because I think some of your doctors, or are you going to do any other things to kind of help this awareness right now?
Yes. So coming up on the 24th, we'll be talking with another family.
Okay.
Um, Amy Newman is going to come on and she will talk about her two kiddos. She has two children who have EOE. One just graduated from high school.
Hey, Caitlin.
And so she is looking to go to nursing school. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation about that transition that we were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
What that looks like and how you prepare for that. Talk about some of the anxieties centered around that.
Mhm.
And then on the 25th, we will talk to two of our board members who are AJ's treating physicians.
Oh, great.
One is an allergy immunologist, Dr. Carla Davis. She is the chief of allergy immunology at Texas Children's Hospital. And
Mhm.
we will also be talking with Dr. Anthony Olive, who is a gastroenterologist and the co-director of the eosinophilic gastrointestinal diseases clinic at Texas Children's
Oh, that's
Hospital.
great.
And they've been plugging away and doing big things, and
Yeah, yeah.
they've taken care of AJ since we've moved here, and they've done a phenomenal job. And so I'm really excited to have those conversations with them as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think it's
And
great.
then we have the caboose. We're going to be talking
Oh,
with Nicole Webb and her daughter, who has eosinophilic esophagitis. And we didn't even get into the comorbidities, but has a couple of other
yeah,
comorbidities associated with EOE. And she's going to bring it up in the rear on May the 30th.
perfect. Love it. I love all that you're doing. And as a mom, I appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
And like you said, all these organizations, we're all heading in the same direction, right? We all want the same thing. So I love to have another one at the table who's doing big things, even if it doesn't mean big dollars. It doesn't matter. You're still doing big things down there, and I love to see it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And
All
thanks for
right.
having a conversation.
Thanks, Cami, for
Yeah,
talking to me.
yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Join us on the 24th, where we're talking to Amy, and join us on the 25th when we have the experts come on for a question and answer series. Thank you so much. Cami, thank you for interviewing me. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Good night.
Good night.